guy buddy Johnny Holiday.
Hi again, everybody. How are you? This is Bill Randall back again.
Ed Fisher's my name. How'd you do?
It's 1:17, WIXY Thanksgiving time on the Larry Morrow Show.
And you lily livers out in Parma that didn't come down.
Of the Buzzard Blossom Music.
I'm Bill Gordon. Glad to welcome you to our program.
It's almost April, and April is Easter.
Like to get, if I could, 1,200 hamburgers.
Morning bandwagon. Now, I'm Johnny Andrews.
Try the Mad Daddy method, because I'm sure you'll
Have you
rave.
seen the new Joe Merrick candy bar, ladies? Oh, it's a great candy bar. You unwrap it. It tells you how good it is.
100.7 WMMS.
It's Runyon calling. How are you this morning? All things considered.
Another big Tuesday night rock and roll get-together with all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom. And away we go.
Radio. It's a process where sound is transmitted through the air from one place to another. It's been around since the early 20th century, whether it was listening to live orchestras and plays in the early days to listening in your car to records spun by Alan Freed, Bill Randall, or Kid Leo, or talk from Gary D. Radio has been the electronic connection that has helped stitch us together here in Northeast Ohio. Come along with us as we take a trip down the dial together, from the early days to the late 20th century, and reconnect with that person who touched us when they played a special song, or gave us some news, or a story that made us laugh or cry. Warm up the set. The transmission of 50,000 watts of radio memories is about to begin.
WGAR, Cleveland, Ohio.
As we travel back through the years to the era of flappers, Model Ts, and vacuum tubes, we see that radio was a family event.
From high atop the Statler Hotel in beautiful downtown Cleveland, Ohio, it's the WGAR Orchestra with musical favorites for your listening pleasure. This is your announcer, Bill Ward, wishing you a wonderful evening. More tuneful renditions are just ahead, but first, this word from our sponsor.
You've seen the typical picture of the father reading the newspaper and the mother knitting and the children on the floor, the girl playing with her dolls, the boy playing with his toy tank in front of the big radio. That was our family, although I had a brother, not a sister.
And yes, we did sit around it just like people sit around television sets and listened.
Ladies and gentlemen, during the past quarter hour, we've been broadcasting from border to border and coast to coast the melodies of Frank Stark. And here's the trumpet man, it's wide open, Frank Stark.
Said, what the heck did we do? You know, you sit there, just sit around, look at each other, and my parents would read. I remember that. They could read the paper and listen to the radio at the same time. Now, I never read the paper at that point, but I suppose I did my homework and listened to radio.
Bumper to bumper, just climbing along. Some of them have streamers. Some of them are using homemade streamers, which come right out of the, I might say, the most used utility room in the house.
Whether it was 1945 or 1965, kids listened to the radio while they worked on that algebra assignment.
It was probably one of the reasons it took me so long to do my homework, is that I always wanted to have the radio on.
Everybody was always messing with the knob. So, in my household, we always heard, who changed the radio station.
And I can remember my father trying to detach us from the radio, so we would come to dinner, And, when he would just turn it off and say it's dinner time, we were just outraged because there was a story going on.
We weren't allowed to listen to the radio during the dinner hour because that was conversation time. So the radio had to be snapped off, and I was always struggling to make sure I got to hear Little Orphan Annie.
So you'd send away for the Orphan Annie mug, and then you'd wait for it. You'd look for it next day in the mail, but you knew it wouldn't come for a while. And there was like, the anticipation was better than Christmas. It's like you can't wait to get your hands on whatever it was.
I grew up listening to the radio. My favorite show was The Lone Ranger. From out of the past come the thundering hoofbeats of the great horse Silver.
It seemed to me as a kid that the lives of the Lone Ranger and Bobby Benson were just going on and on and on. And then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody would stick, or 7:30 at night, somebody would stick a microphone into their life, and we'd get a piece of it. And then after we left, they kept on having adventures.
We listened to the Amos and Andy Show. We listened to Long Ranger. We listened to The Squeaking Door. Did you ever hear that one? The Squeaking Door? I Love a Mystery and all this kind of stuff. And we'd sit there and just drool, and we would go completely away.
I remember one about some great blob that was covering the earth that was as vivid as anything you would read in a book
or see on television nowadays. It was amazing what they could do with just the sound effects and voices.
I used to like to turn all the lights off in the room and sit there and listen to the shadow, you know, because, I mean, and there were, especially when I was a kid, and then there was a show at night that my parents wouldn't let me listen to called Inner Sanctum, and I would stay up late. And I was so happy when they invented a transistor radio that I could get under my pillow.
Joe Mayer on a Saturday morning, April 3rd, 1900, Safety 5. We're into April already.
When I was 11, it was WHK, and I was hiding all night under the covers, listening to the radio, and everybody yelling at you. You know, everyone goes through that.
I remember sitting around at night and putting the radio under the covers, and you'd have it plugged in and you could listen to music, the rock and roll that was played at night.
I used to go to bed at night and take the table radio in the bedroom and stick it under my pillow, but the cord was a giveaway, so sooner or later my mother was going to catch me.
I talked to a lot of rock stars, Peter Frampton, everybody always had a radio tucked under their pillow, and their mothers didn't know it, you know.
When you're a kid, you think those voices are like kind of born there. They just probably came out of the womb with a microphone cord instead of an umbilical cord.
NBC Radio News on the Hour, John O'Day reporting.
You know, the cool thing about AM radio is that at night, when the atmospheric conditions are right, those big 50,000 watt stations can be heard for hundreds, even thousands of miles.
John O'Day, NBC News.
And I'm, listening to a transistor radio in my bed, and all of a sudden I'm picking up New York stations and Chicago radio stations, because at night you have the skip where distant signals would come booming in. So there was this magical world. You were suddenly plugged into a much larger universe, and you felt you're listening to radio stations you're not supposed to be listening to because they're coming from another city.
Snow flurries tomorrow. The temperature now 40 degrees. That's the...
Trying to get stations from Kansas City or Chicago on a variety of different radio contraptions, including the crystal radio. You attach it to the pipes on the toilet or something, to get a good antenna.
It's now 28 minutes away from 7 o'clock. Pepsi Litterbox time on a Sunday night with more.
You could hear Atlanta, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, St. Louis. You could hear their local weather forecasts, commercials, their local business commercials, local news, and it was just a magical, incredible way to be in touch.
Cleveland 60, Toledo 61, and it's currently 61 at CKLW.
From the start, radio in Northeast Ohio has affected the rest of the country. A lot of performers from here hit the big time, like Edith Davis and her sister Helen Trutko. They were in a local radio series that their mom wrote. NBC liked it so much, they put it on the network.
Awful hiccups on the way out to Mosquito Jungle.
And Mother used to pick us up after school and take us to the studio. We had very little time to rehearse, probably in the car, and a little time after we got there, and we were on in the evening.
The show that my mother had was called Tinker Kids and Liza. The show was kind of some of the ordinary adventures that kids have with animals they want to adopt, nosy neighbors, perfect children who are held up as a kind of a model for you that you get to dislike.
Oh, Liza, can we have her made to look like a lion?
Being on the show was fun, but in those days, kids were not getting the big bucks.
I did not see any increase in my allowance at that time. I would have been certainly remembered that.
In the 1950s, there weren't too many women, let alone girls, controlling the music on the radio. But things were changing.
And we have regular dedications. So Main 1, 2894 is the number to call. Main 1, 2894.
Wayne Mack had hired Candy Lee in 1951 to work at WDOK, and she was one of the youngest girls ever heard on radio that had a weekly program. Every Saturday, she was 9 years old, spinning records at WDOK in 1951.
Tony Bennett, and a real beautiful number called Young and Warm and Wonderful.
As a teenager in 1959, Candy Lee had managed to stump the panel with her unique job on What's My Line.
But it was fun, and John Daly had to flip the cards at the end,
and give me the $50 or whatever it was that I won, and because they couldn't guess what I was.
There were other disc jockeys behind the microphones in Akron and Cleveland who were at the forefront of a cultural revolution.
All right, the old Moondog is beating it out, folks, and the old Moondog Rock and Roll Party on Tuesday night is just getting underway. Got a long way to go. 2.5 hours of your favorite blues and rhythm record show.
Well, Moondog was, without a doubt, Alan Freed was without a doubt the man, and he was so the man. He was so special that, you know, we're living in Cleveland, this little Cleveland, our own little corner of the world. However, we knew that what we were listening to, whatever the Moondog was playing, had to be something special. This was worldwide. This was the biggest thing you ever heard in your life.
He was playing black records by black artists meant for black audience on white radio stations, and that's why he became such a big hit.
And away we go with Gil Bernal, picking up that tenor horn to blow it strong, and the spark label and the whip.
Growing up in Akron, I heard Freed from the day he started in Akron. He was absolutely fantastic. You could drive through Akron in the evening when he was on the air, from North Akron to South Akron. You could hear it in the other cars.
First time I heard Alan on the air when I came to Cleveland, you know, I knew this guy, the microphone loved him, and that voice, he was super. He was a great showman.
True beer flavor that just can't be beat. Enjoy the finest, save money, always.
But one of my favorite memories of the Moondogger was the live Aaron Brew beer commercials that he would do on the air, when he would open the beer on the air, right close to the microphone, and if you're thirsty or you're a beer fan, this is gonna get you.
Then take a nice, long sip. Boy, that stuff is really here.
No longer could you say, ladies and gentlemen, here's our next song, and it's by Frankie Lane. Freed was screaming and pounding a phone book and going nuts.
Boy, this is a real rockin' thing to get us off and rolling on our Tuesday night rock and roll Moondoggers.
He was the first. Randall was the second. I don't know if anybody even came close after that.
Bill was one of, if not the most influential disc jockey in the country. If Randall played a record, chances were it'd be a hit.
Hi again, everybody. How are you? This is Bill Randall back again with the last hour of our show, Music All Requestfully for You. This part of our show brought to you by the Higbee Music Center and presenting Dean Martin, the orchestra and chorus of Dick Stabile, a Hawaiian guitarist, one of the biggest records in the country. Memories are made of this.
The only record station in town was WERE with Randall. And of course, Randall had between 6 and 7 o'clock at night of all the radios on in Northeast Ohio, or where ERE covered. He had about 69% of the audience.
Bill Randall, for me, when I was a kid, was probably the most effective storyteller that I ever experienced up to that time. And every performer that he introduced, he seemed to know intimately, even if he didn't. You know, that was the story he was telling, and it was fascinating to me.
Theatrical Grill. He's a very brilliant modern jazz man. We'd like to have you listen to one of the things from his new album. From Patterns in Purple, the Bobby Stevenson Trio with Coffee Time.
My mother is the #1 Bill Randall fan on earth. And when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, we'd dance around the kitchen.
Bill Randall was the first disc jockey north of the Mason-Dixon line to promote a young truck-driving singer from Tupelo, Mississippi. Randall brought Elvis Presley to Brooklyn High School and the Cleveland Arena.
People in Cleveland who have made Elvis overnight one of the really gigantic stars in this particular area. Here he is. He's destined to be the big new star of 1956, Elvis Presley.
And he brought me to that concert at the old Cleveland Arena, and he said, Norm, this man is going to be the biggest act in America. And I said, you got to be kidding.
He was the guy that introduced Elvis Presley on network TV. Bill Randall was 100% music. He knew music, he knew the artist, and at times, I'll tell you the truth, I thought, this guy is more like a college professor than a disc jockey because I'm learning more about the music than just listening to it.
There he is, the great Elvis Presley with Scotty and Bill, one of the greatest in-person performers we've ever seen, destined to be the big new star of early 1956.
I remember several things about him. Number one, the great music he would play and the way he would tease you about things. Randall had a very, very unique way of being able to say, I've got this record, it's coming in from New York, and it's going to come in on flight, whatever it was, on such and such airline. And the anticipation, all that time is, what's this record going to be? What's this record?
Mitch Miller literally would call Bill Randall from the recording studio, and they would play him the playbacks of the takes that they had just done to see if they should release the record. Bill Randall was the hit maker, and if he played a record, that gave it instant credibility.
Randall was the monster. He was the 500-pound gorilla. And if he didn't play the record, you know, all the other jocks in town could play it and it wouldn't be a hit.
And that just about winds it up for us. We'll be back again tomorrow from 2 to 7 with more music. This is Bill Randall saying good night for now from WERE AM and FM. We're Cleveland, still America's #1 music city.
There was this convergence. Out came radio, right? And out came rock and roll as well. And the two just, I mean, you can't have one without the other. And Cleveland was, man, it was like essential in making rock and roll radio happen around the country.
It was common to go out and get in the car and turn up the music and cruise up and down, you know, the two-lane street that was the main drag of town with your car radio playing and stop and talk to people and go to the Dairy Queen or whatever, and that was all part of it.
The first car I got had a killer radio. It was a great radio. And I always thought that was the most important thing on a car, aside from the brakes, was a good radio. And we just go cruising, where you had no destination in mind, but you just drive and listen to the radio.
Oh, baby, just like 1957. My 57 Studebaker. Chopped and channeled, ready to go, and my blinking dice in the back there. Whatever, I don't know.
What is the perfect complement to a hot car, your hot girlfriend? You got some hot music. That's coming out of the radio speakers. You know, you're moving, you're grooving, you're driving down the road. Yeah, I got my car out. We're going to get something to eat. You got the music blasting. I mean, you've got the best of all worlds.
I have to say one of the most fun things I remember was probably a 1964 Dodge convertible. I was a young mother at the time, and I had the top down and up and away blasting on the radio, and just felt like I was up and away.
It was like a backdrop. It was just, and you'd play it as loud as you could. I remember my dad would always come in when I started driving, and the first thing he would do was turn it off, because he'd turn it on and boom, you know, I want to hold your hand, and that, you know, off it goes.
If you dated, you had to have a special song with you and your gal, and Brady would be driving along, and then you have your arm around it, she's snuggling in, you know, and your song comes on, and you're there, you can't get your hand off trying to get it turned up a little louder so you can hear your song.
Love music for a woman is special. If she's thinking about you getting lucky, and she hears love music, you're going to get lucky. If you hear the right songs, you're going to get lucky.
The only thing I'll tell you is that Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky has wonderful memories for me, but you know who you are and you're out there.
Ringo, would you still like to be a disc jockey? Oh, yeah.
Radio is a technological medium with transmitters, receivers, microphones, kilowatts, megacycles, kilocycles, and on. But what it really gets down to is a one-on-one electronic relationship between two people.
Tonight below 24, snuggy weather, baby. Tomorrow, chance of snow, and the high will be in the 30s. The present Cleveland temp is now 22 degrees.
You have someone who is talking to you that you can become a friend with.
That's the Youngbloods and a brand new thing for them, Darkness, Darkness. That's soon to come out on a new album, of which isn't out yet, but should be.
Radio is special because it is that partner you have, whether it's in the car or at home, you're not alone.
Bass was the first radio guy I ever identified with. It was like this oasis in this top 40 desert where this different kind of music had like snuck in somehow, and he sounded so darn cool about it at the same time. I mean, it was really, I really felt like I was being led into some pretty cool club by like listening to his show.
You're not alone in the world. If you turn on the radio, there's somebody else talking at you and playing deep music and all kinds of fun things.
Well, hello there. 5 minutes after 3 o'clock on 1220 WGAR Radio. That was Steely Dan and All About Peg. Here's Linda Ronstadt. It just took one little look.
These people were like Pied Pipers. They talked your language, they understood what you were going through, they were your buds, and you could visit them whenever you wanted to because they were always there on the radio.
And they were part of your community. You could hear them on the radio and run into them at the grocery store. And they sounded like here. Each city had its own sound.
Get together and look who's here. Here's Larry Robinson.
The constant companion would be the disc jockey. You had a friend, like the big 12-20 used to say, where your friends are. The personality was anywhere from someone who would entertain you, have fun with you on the air, to consoling or even being a confidant.
Honky smokes, Bullwinkle. I'm your boogie man. That's Casey and the Sunshine Band from their album Disco Sweat. It's the real Bob James.
I think you feel connected to the people that you listen to on the radio. In a way, you idolize them. I idolize DJs when I was growing up.
Those days, you fell in love or attached to a disc jockey like you are to a movie star today.
Hello, 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 what a wonderful bird.
So who were listeners idolizing throughout the decades? In the 1930s, it was Gene and Glenn, Gene Carroll and Glenn Rowland, who started in Cleveland on WTAM and became national celebrities on NBC.
The popularity of Gene and Glenn from here in Cleveland was phenomenal. Gene and Glenn were two song and dance men, and they created the characters Jake and Lena.
Be a color of joy, you know.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, it makes you sing like a flute.
Is that so?
Why don't you sing something, Glenn?
The audience who was never allowed permitted into the studios were totally fooled. They thought actually there were 4 characters when here in all there was only Gene Carroll and Glenn playing Jake and Lena as well. And the books have it that one day Jake was supposed to marry Lena on WTAM. Hundreds and hundreds of gifts were received by the NBC building here in Cleveland. But when it became wedding day that Saturday, in 1934, I believe, Jake had left Lena at the altar and was a no-show. So hundreds and hundreds of phone calls came into NBC on his whereabouts. People found him here, people found him there. Little did they know it was just a make-believe character in Gene Carroll's mind.
I always wanted to meet Glenn for one reason. His laugh was so marvelous. He had a chuckle that was irresistible.
Picking that teeth.
Good, huh?
Well, you sound pretty gay tonight, I'll tell you that.
You sing pretty lively yourself.
Wayne Mack had a personality that was irresistible to listeners. His career spanned 7 decades. It all started in 1931.
The Cosmopolitan Hour belongs to a city like Cleveland, where we can say dobre odpoledne, dobre odpoludnie, dzień dobry, pozdravleni, and guten tag.
We had everything but one thing. We had no script. It was improv all the way. You said what came to you to say. And half the time we were on the floor from laughing because everybody was going in his own direction.
Many other friendly greetings, and have people all over town saying them right back.
Wayne Mack wanted to pick up a sheet off the floor, and one of the people there put his foot on it, you know. And so there was this little tussle going on, you know, and you could see that they had a long day and they had to kind of amuse themselves now and then. They used to do the announcers.
If you listen to Wayne Mack, you probably bumped into him at the Waltz Palace. It was real, but only on the radio.
The famous Waltz Palace, Northern Ohio's oldest, most beautiful ballroom, is situated on wide landscaped grounds right along the lake, some 22 miles outside of town on picturesque Sunset Road with this area's most beautiful view. Come out tonight.
Why don't we have a sumptuous, gorgeous ballroom built out on the lake, right near Cleveland? And I mean, we have a big orchestra, and we'd have our same sound effects, the applause and the hubbub, and I point out different actual people in the crowd.
Oh, friends, I wish you could see how they're thronging this place. Every entrance is being used as couples keep coming in. So many of them dressed in evening clothes, and that means parties later on as they'll be diverging after their evening here to many parties.
People drove all over Northeast Ohio trying to find the Waltz Palace.
People would actually drive to Indian Ridge Road trying to find these ballrooms, and it never existed.
People just went dancing, you know, and had this vision of this wonderful ballroom, and it wasn't there.
Radio is it was the last great illusion.
It was my whole life. I'm pre-TV.
I like radio over television because on radio, the pictures are a lot better.
We continue our program of musical favorites with a beautiful selection from the WGAR Orchestra.
Before World War II, most music on the radio did not come from recordings. Stations like WAKR, WGAR, WHK, and WTAM had live orchestras.
Now back to Johnny Andrews. Thank you very much, Carl. Better tune up, Henry.
Morning Bandwagon was a program that started in 1952. He wanted to compete with the disc jockeys on the other stations, but doing something different, live music.
NBC in Cleveland, your station is WTAM.
The announcer for the Morning Bandwagon was Joe Finan.
They had a 35-piece orchestra, at least. I'm just judging from how many people were in that studio, but it was a large orchestra. You know, as far as I was concerned, I had hit the big time as a kid. I thought, wow, this is really, this is NBC.
In fact, the Morning Bandwagon was done live every day. One day a year, Christmas Day, was the only day I put the show on tape once we got tape recording. It was all live, and in fact, so were the network ones. The soap operas were live, and when they did the repeats for the different time zones, they did them live again before the days of putting things on tape came to pass. The shows were done sometimes 2 or 3 times in an evening to hit the various time zones.
By the 1950s, programs like the Morning Bandwagon, although successful, started to be pared back because broadcasting companies were putting their money into television. Smaller radio budgets brought on the birth of the disc jockey, one person playing records instead of an expensive room full of musicians. In Cleveland, one who did it like no one else was Pete Myers, also known as the Mad Daddy.
Off we go with the wavy gravy jars to visit Grandma up on Mars.
As Pete Myers, he would speak like I'm speaking to you now. He did his regular show as Pete Myers, and it was, "Good afternoon, it's Pete Myers on the radio." And when he became Mad Daddy, he became a completely, it's like a different human being came out of his mouth.
Off wavy gravy there to burn your brain. The champs swinging and singing on that old night train. Mad Daddy giggle on the Thursday scene, and the clock indicates just 9:13.
He had the bubbling sound effects in the background and the wavy gravy. And if you listen to air checks, it's just an astounding thing. It's nothing like it and never will be.
Zany, nutty, left of center, and a bit ghoulish, if you will, too, even before the King, even before Goularte.
When Johnny Holiday came to WHK in 1959, he got the supreme introduction to the Mad Daddy.
So I went down, and he's got the window covered over with a black, like a cape, like your shirt. You couldn't see inside, so I go up to the control room, and here's this guy, he's wearing a hood. I mean, he was into the whole routine. And I'm saying, is he serious? Oh yeah, very serious. And you're gonna have to leave, because he wants nobody watching him work. So I left. My introduction to Pete Myers.
Mad Daddy was part of a new wave of music and culture, making it up as they went along.
There was a whole group of people coming up that wanted to hear rock and roll. There was no radio like that at that time. It was something brand new. And suddenly you had countdowns and surveys and rock and roll and jingles. I thought that was terrific.
1100 WKYC for a KYW encore. WHK Color Channel 14 Color Radio.
Johnny Holiday, who did afternoons on WHK, and Holiday came in when they became Color Radio, Color Channel 14, and which was, you know, who the heck knows what it meant. It was, you know, fast talking, a lot of jingles. He played the platter pole, fabulous 50 tune decks, and he always signed off with bye bye bye, bond safe, chicken fat, join the wax.
So instead of saying it's 81 degrees outside, we'd say 81 degrees in the funshine. Now, how bad is that? You know, or I'm going to serve up the cream of the top pop crop. How stupid is that? But it worked in those days, you know. I'm going to take you elbow deep in the ballad bowl. Here's a song to soothe the sad, suffering secretaries. Terrible. But everybody did it, you know, so it worked.
And this is Johnny Holiday reminding you to buy bond, save chicken fat, and join the wax.
But then the Kennedy assassination hits, and this malaise covers the world. But it's like Keith Richard of the Rolling Stones said, when the Beatles hit, February '64, the world was in color.
I had a younger sister, and she got tickets to go to see the Beatles. I think I was the only male in that whole section. Screaming girls, fainting all over the place.
They touched everyone's life, you know, no matter how old or how young, and they were coming to Cleveland. WHK was going to sponsor it.
Whenever you think WHK, you always think the Beatles. For some reason, they brought the Beatles here in 1964, and that had to be the most exciting year, you know, in all of rock and roll, in my opinion. You had Emperor Joe Mayer. You know, every time you saw a picture of the Beatles in Cleveland, there was Emperor Joe, you know, and he was right there. Whenever you heard him talk about the Beatles, it was as exciting as if you were in the room with the Beatles.
Emperor Joe and the WHK Good Guys must have made an impression on the Beatles. Take a close look. Yes, it says WHK Good Guys.
The WHK Good Guys, I think they were. Came out on stage, you know, and introduced themselves first, and we're the ones that brought the Beatles to Cleveland. Yeah, WHK. Cleveland history. Mayor Loker wouldn't let them come back in '65 because there was such pandemonium.
Loyalties changed quickly in top 40 rock radio. In 1966, a little 5,000-watt station, WDOK AM, changed its call letters and music and became the legendary
WIXY 1260 Super Radio.
Most people in a certain age group all listened to WIXY at one time or another. Pretty much, I would say, anyone from 40 to 60 years old that lives in Cleveland had the WIXY experience.
You must be in the 9th grade or older, so get with it. The village idiot, y'all lead the fastest talking in the Midwest here. Jackson Armstrong, and let's kiss y'all sweetie time.
I like the variety of music. They play good music.
I think they were the greatest call letters. I mean, at the time, I remember, you know, WIXY 1260.
Here's a WIXY triple play, 3 together, okay. Do I need to say more?
Here's the WIXY triple play, 3 together, okay.
And they were right on the dial between the stations, and so and it was not digital, so you dial down. The news comes on WHK at 55, and you start dialing down to KYC, and you hit WIXY in the meantime.
It's 1:36 at WIXY, and here's a song we have not heard in a long time.
It had one of the most limited signals in the marketplace. It was so on fire that even if you couldn't pick it up, you would say you listened to it. I grew up in Berea, and if within the household somebody would turn on a TV set and a fluorescent light, between the whistle and the static, it would kill IXY at least at night.
Their transmitter may have been weak, but they could always rely on the great white-winged warrior.
Now, another exciting episode in the life of the most fantastic crime fighter the world has ever known.
Please take a note, Miss Helfinger, that Mr. Harbor will be available on weekends to fight crime as...
Yes?
Chicken Man.
Chicken Man?
Chicken Man. Be listening tomorrow for another exciting episode in the life of...
Great music, hot personalities, but something else also set WIXY apart. They were masters at the art of promotion. Not just on the air, but also on the streets. They made a point to be where you were, right in the middle of things.
By the way, now the outlook for the WIXY Bay Company Christmas Parade tomorrow morning, which starts at 9:30, will be partly cloudy.
WIXY boasted a constant schedule of events and contests. Remember WIXY Appreciation Days? Tens of thousands of fans thronged to this 1972 event at Edgewater.
We estimate maybe up to 50,000 people here, and everybody is, as you can see, having a great time.
Or the WIXY Satellite Studio, which was truly a promotional vehicle, a converted ice cream truck. We thought it would be amusing to rock the truck while they were doing a live broadcast. The thing was to make the records jump around, and that's the end result when you start rocking the boat there. Much to the dismay of Johnny Walters at one point, I recall, and the Wild Child.
With a high about 20 degrees, and honey, that is chilly.
WIXY certainly knew how to attract a crowd. One of their best remembered had a bigger is better theme.
We had what we called the Francine contest. There was this woman who was well endowed who made the first pages of the papers because she walked from a subway station to her office in Wall Street every day. And we said, anything New York can do, we can do better. So we went to look for her in downtown Cleveland. We attracted something like 15,000 people on the corner of East 9th and Euclid at noontime.
Suzanne, have you always been like this?
Not always. I was little once.
How about you, She?
And I remember a big policeman on a big horse came up to me and said, "Hey, you guys got a license to do what you're doing?" And I said, "Officer, you don't get licenses to throw riots."
In 1966, WIXY was behind a riot of a different sort at Cleveland Stadium. What better way to promote the station than to bring in one of the greatest recording acts of all time?
That was the most incredible event I've ever been at.
The greatest concert of my life to this very day, and I'll thank WIXY for this because they brought the Beatles to town, was in 1966. In the old municipal stadium on the lakefront, there were the Beatles on second base. They had the big banner across the stage, WIXY 1260, all the WIXY DJs come out, the crowd is psyched, everybody's screaming. I mean, for a half an hour, kids are screaming at the top of their lungs, not only for the Beatles, but every WIXY disc jockey comes out and they introduce each one, and the crowd is like, ah! You know, it's like they're loving every minute of this, and then the Beatles come out. And to me, I always associate seeing the Beatles with WIXY, those disc jockeys, and my radio station.
WIXY was born at a time when everything was changing. Music, clothing, and social attitudes. And WIXY did more than just play records and do wild promotions.
If anybody broke the color line, it was Norman Wayne. Norman hired me against all odds, and I never got to go out. You know, all the WIXY Supermen, you remember that phrase? The WIXY Supermen were here, they were there, they were everywhere. They were in photos, they were in the newspapers, they were everywhere, except me. And I went to Norman, I said, "Norman, how come these guys get to go out and everywhere and I don't?" And Norman looked at me and said, "Are you nuts? It's because you're black." I mean, only then could you be that honest, right? Norman was so right. You know, as soon as people found out I was black, then I'd get calls, people calling up, you know, the N-word this and the N-word that and the N-word that. It was kind of strange. But remember, that was that time.
Billy has talked about his being first, which he was, on a so-called white station as a black jock. To some degree, you know, Bass would be sort of the Jackie Robinson of Cleveland rock and roll radio.
By that time, music by rhythm and blues artists was being heard more on the so-called white stations.
My best remembrance is when my parents brought my younger brother home, and my dad had the '64 white Chevy. And you know, at that time we were listening to the Supremes, and you know, they were brand new then. But my mom said, "I can't believe I'm listening to a black group." on this station.
Some of the records that would break by, you know, the Unifics, you know, the minor ones, but, you know, Delphonics records you'd hear first maybe on WABQ or WJMO, and then they'd work their way over to WHK.
You would hear it on like WJMO, and then like weeks later, maybe a month or so later, you'd hear it on, it's like, hey, but then it's called, they're a crossover artist. It's like, well, what are they crossing over to?
JMO is famous 1490. It's 250 cash clock. This is
when we're talking the Parliaments, when we're talking Sly and the Family Stone, I think you heard them first on the R&B stations like WJMO and WABQ.
Number 20 on the Monty Soul Brothers WJMO survey.
When I was growing up, it was just all music. We listened to JMO and ABQ, and those are our stations. We grew up on Motown, on Aretha Franklin, on the OJs, that type of thing. Growing up, it was ABQ and JMO, and that was it.
I think that it was special having ABQ and JMO and radio stations that were predominantly targeted for the black audience. It gave you a sense of community.
Just how do you like it out here at Camp WABQ?
Well, we play baseball and football and eat, and the food they have out here is real good.
Denver Wilborn has worked in Cleveland radio since the 1950s, with WABQ as his home.
I worked with Mary Holt, who was the dynamic personality. She was the groundbreaker. She was the Lone Ranger that started first, and nobody else, no other woman has actually competed with Mary Holt. Walking and talking Bill Hawkins. A lot of glamour, a lot of personality, you know, and everybody wanted to be like him.
If you were in the Rubber City, you found other choices.
In the inner city, we mostly all listened to the same type of music, which was R&B. And in Akron, we didn't have any, you know, black or R&B radio stations, as it were. And we just chose 1590 WAKR.
WAKR's Happy Time, 7:23 a.m., and our WAKR weather eye temperature reading now stands at 62 degrees.
Because it was an Akron station, then we took pride in that, and that's what we wanted to listen to. We wanted to know what was going on, where we were.
And Akron, Ohio in the 40s and the 50s was like the fastest growing city in the United States because of the rubber industry exploding. 3 or 4 major companies there, and a lot of people from, they say, West Virginia, etc., came to work in the rubber shop. So the mixture of music there was rock and roll, country, and let's get down to it.
63 degrees at 9:57. Good morning, I'm Eric Braun.
Whether you were in Akron, Cleveland, or Charleston, you could listen to the big 50,000-watt powerhouse, 1220 WGAR.
Full power, 50,000-watt WGAR. Good morning to you. This is Joe. In the present 1220 temperature is a lovely 34.
The most music.
Northern Night has music power.
WGAR.
Getting underway in a very special way. First record.
In the 70s, WGAR had a great lineup of personalities like Bob Vernon, Chuck Collier, Fig Newton, Bob James, and of course, Don Imus.
Hi, Mr. Williams. This is Mr. Kent. I stayed over at your hotel last night, and I lost a pair of horn-rimmed glasses. Oh.
Yeah, I'll call you back. And your name?
Ask for Mr. Kent.
Mr. Kent?
Clark Kent.
Turn that radio on with Don Imus. Whoa. Some of the humor was a little blue, but Don was one of the first really shock jocks around.
Don was the first guy that I'm aware of that really combined a lot of humor with a lot of scripted bits and character things and shtick. We were sort of the precursors to the Radio Morning Zoo.
He was as redneck as they came, for real. One of the funniest human beings I've ever sat with.
How did Velvet Peanut Butter improve your sex life, ma'am?
How does it improve my sex life?
Yeah.
I probably didn't get it. Probably went right over my head.
When Imus got here, he was the funniest man on the planet. And it was just a different kind of funny.
We found the first 24 hours was the toughest, and after that it just kind of, you become a numbing sensation, and now we just don't make any sense at all.
After a year and a half, Imus moved on to New York. The guy who replaced him also achieved legendary status.
John Lanigan. And I'm thinking, boy, he better be pretty good to take Imus's spot. I'll never forget John's first announcement, little promo spot. I can remember it to this day. Hi, this is Lanigan. Some people say I'm full of wit, but I'm going to be here on Monday morning. And I thought, oh,
Joe is, of course, our public service director also.
Yes.
He's in charge of service for the public. And there's a lot of public out there he serviced just in the last week, I'm told. Oh, he's always out servicing somebody. Here, can I service you? Good.
Joe Mayer was one of the legends in Cleveland radio, followed me every morning. We had a great time together. We had this great crossover that just evolved out of joking with each other, and Joe was the best laugher in the whole world. You could go, snow, and he'd go, ah, ha, ha, ha. It didn't matter. He was just a great laugher, and the bit was incredible. It was 20 years we did that.
Around the same time, up the dial at 1300, WERE was trying something new with People Power Radio, led by a guy who said he was #1 in all the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, thousands, be quiet down, thousands here. And you lily livers out in Parma that didn't come down, eat your hearts out.
I'm not sure he was good, but he certainly was different.
Gary D was the originator of shock radio in Cleveland, Ohio. Imus was a Johnny-come-lately. Gary D was so ridiculously funny and absurd and crazy. I mean, nobody in Cleveland ever saw anything like this. He was so over the top that he rubbed people the wrong way, but he was really interesting to have. Gary D, I think, should get a lot of credit for inventing shock radio.
Good morning, WHK. You're on the radio.
Is this our fearless leader?
Amen, brother.
Gary,
I will lead you wherever you guide me.
Oh, you want to go to Iran?
Oh, well, if that's what...
Gary was nuts. He was totally nuts. He created talk radio. Gary created a whole different genre. He was outrageous. He would say whatever he wanted to. It didn't matter.
Everybody was at home listening to Gary D and George Forbes, and we were anxious to talk about it at the water cooler the next morning.
Off the roadway or you're going to be arrested.
Gary D found out that a bridge was unsafe, and then we had statistics. There had been the Silver Bridge disaster and some others, and we got real concerned, and Gary D decided that he wasn't going to let people cross this bridge anymore. And so he laid down on the bridge, and they had to arrest him and take him away. It was very good radio. It was funny as heck, and they did take him and throw him in jail. I never told anybody, but it was also the wrong bridge. He went to the wrong bridge.
The Cleveland City Council president was also on People Power a lot, not as a guest, but as a talk show host.
He'd come out with this bluesy, real laid-back kind of music, and here you'd have, Gary D and Merle Paulus and this People Power in your face all day, and then there'd be George. He'd kind of come on there, well, good evening.
For a lot of people, a good evening was listening to Sweet Pete Franklin.
Really? P.O. Positively outraged.
Pete was a sports talker, but he was bigger than that.
Pete had a storehouse of knowledge. He had a photographic memory, and he remembered facts.
He would never look at a note. He never made a grammatical error. He would just look in that microphone, talk for 10 or 15 minutes straight. It would just flow.
The giants, and there are about 4 or 5 of us in America, and I'm one of the great ones. We won't die because what we have is unique.
How unique?
I'm still #1. I'll be #1 after I die.
Guys like Franklin and D were on top when AM was king, and FM was something only a few diehards were in tune with.
One of my first days at WMS, and one of the first people I'm confronted with is the chief engineer of the station at the time. And he says, you know what FM means? He said, find me. And let me tell you something, nobody's going to find you. FM is a meaningless format. The only reason why we're doing something on this FM is because the FCC is making us do it.
Von Hafen zu Hafen geht die Fahrt und überall erklingen die Lieder der Matrosen.
FM was unexplored territory and little listened to. It was very specialized to most of the 1960s. You had ethnic radio stations like WZAK, WXEN in Cleveland. You had classical music, which sounded better on FM.
WZAK, 93,1 auf ihrem Wellenband in Cleveland, Ohio.
So, who was listening to FM in the early days?
Oh, there were hi-fi nuts because of high fidelity. Stereo had just come in and people were buying stereo radios.
It was natural then that Cleveland's classical station, WCLV, would find its home on FM back in the early 60s.
Initially, we ran the station by the heart rather than by the books. And had we run it by the books, we would have been country and western a long, long time ago. You have to be willing to take the chance that maybe you won't be number one, that there is an advantage in being, in our case, number 12.
FM was also a place for educators. The Cleveland Board of Education started WBOE as a teaching tool for students and anyone in Cleveland who had an FM radio.
You're tuned to 90.3 WCPN, listener-supported public radio.
The Cleveland schools eventually gave up their license to another FM staple, public radio. In Cleveland, it's WCPN.
We do have loyal listeners who respect and enjoy and benefit from the programming that they hear on WCPN.
FM would eventually be a powerhouse, with buzzards ruling the roost. But it would take a while to get there. And before the buzzard, there was WNCR.
We have People's Radio 1 ads for you at 578-1414, and we are selling a Polaroid land camera.
There was something bubbling underground. Here was the idea that there was a station that didn't blank out under the bridges, that was playing cool music and was on full-time playing cool music.
We were all about breaking new ground and really creating something new called the progressive rock radio format.
WNCR was breaking other ground.
I want to tell you how surprising it is that we're even doing a show today.
And it never occurred to me that we have a woman on the station, Shauna, or Ron and Kay when they did a husband and wife thing. And we have, you know, I have a black program director. We called them men back then, you know, they were black then, in Billy Bass. And here's Martin Perlich with hair down to his waist.
The WMMS lineup that anchored the station for nearly a decade was also a diverse group of personalities.
And we'll be playing it again through the night, right here exclusively at MMS.
I brought in Matt the Cat. Jeff Kinsbach was a friend of mine in Detroit, and he came in to work for us. The skinny Italian kid walked into my office one afternoon and had an air check, and that was Kid Leo. What a riot he was. And Betty Corbin. And eventually Jeff and Flash got together. And that was the beginning of the air staff that really remained unchanged at that radio station for over 10 years. And that's unheard of in the business, even then.
A lot of these people came into radio because they loved the music, but they would share that music with you as well. And a lot of them, it was their first radio job. Who's going to work for that money? Put them on the FM. They might work for $2 an hour. At the same time, they got across to their audience.
554, Jeff and Flash, along with Laura Farrell.
They played music because they enjoyed it. And they played music so that I could decide what I wanted, what I liked. I could buy the album.
222, Kid Leo here with you until 6 o'clock at 100.7 WMS, your music marathon station.
It was sort of a badge of honor. It was like a rites of passage, that if you were listening to MS, you were no longer listening to that bubblegum AM or Top 40. You had graduated, you were an adult now.
With success comes competition and good old-fashioned radio wars, just like in the 50s and 60s.
There you have 40 minutes of continuous music for a Thursday night beer drinking night. TR, sitting in, take...
The battle between MMS and 105 was based on a quality battle. And I mean, sometimes we were fighting tune for tune. If suddenly people had a choice in this market, the listeners had a choice. If they didn't like something that MMS was playing, there was another radio station you go to and hear the same kind of music.
It was a constant battle. It was a constant war. It was total spontaneity. We made it up as we went, and we did anything and everything. And it worked for both stations.
We were really creating our own artists, and especially here in Cleveland, where a lot of those bands broke. Humble Pie, Yes, Mott the Hoople, Lou Reed, David Bowie. These were not artists that you were going to hear on any other format, and we were actually creating careers here.
They knew what the kids liked. They were just in touch with the kids. Actually, Bowie's first time in America was in Cleveland, and the first show in America was in Cleveland. And so Cleveland was the center of that, and MMS was on top of everything that way.
No, it wasn't calculated. It was, I loved Roxy music. I loved the New York Dolls. I loved Springsteen and many others. And some didn't make it. But you know what? They had a place in Cleveland.
From the day that WHK signed on as the first station in Ohio to the rise of FM radio, there has been a special quality to the radio in Northeast Ohio.
Cleveland was noted as a place where records could be broken, where people wanted to hear the latest recording by the top popular stars. And every major artist in the country came to Cleveland first.
The number of performers, the talent that has come from this town and has had the opportunity to develop, whether it was Imus or whether it was Pete Myers, whether it was John Lanning, all the talent that has been cultivated has been unbelievable.
These are the storytellers of our lives. I know that sounds corny, but they're the voices of my life.
Music, voices, and sound effects. That's all radio is, really. When you take away all the cool equipment, all the knobs, microphones, transmitters, and receivers, good radio is just people connecting to people. Radio is telling a spooky story around a campfire, gossip across the backyard fence, a moving drama, a thrilling musical performance. And it all comes out of this little box that you can take with you wherever you go. The people inside the box have touched your life. That's why radio memories are special.
I'm Bob here on the Jim Stagg Show.
Hi, anybody. Trust you well and happy.
This is Joe Mossbrook, NBC News in Cleveland.
Good evening from 1220 WGAR. I'm Ken Cortright.
It's 125 WGAR Smile Time with J.R. Nelson.
Be looking for you on September 5th. All right, it's 1:20 right now. I'm Dia.
And that's the 11th hour news for tonight. This is Tom Fields.
Time on the Tom Armstrong program to take a look at our feature, The Word for Today, in which we look into the background, the history of words, phrases, and expressions.
And welcome to the last of my shows from the land of the Wiggy Blinkers.